Welcome back to The Lawyer You Know, and we are talking Ronnie O'Neal today. He's back in the news. He was sentenced by the judge last week. We're going to take a look at that sentencing hearing. We're going to hear a little bit from Ronnie O'Neal, and we're going to hear a lot from the judge. So stay tuned to hear what this judge says, and it reveals a lot about what she thought throughout this trial. But before we get to that, make sure you subscribe to our page and like this video. We are growing the community here with this page, The Lawyer You Know. We're getting great content and comments and questions and video suggestions from you all out there that are listening. And we are getting great responses and great insight onto what potential jurors and clients and parties and people dealing with these cases that we see in the news, what they think, how they would react, what's important to them. And as a lawyer, that is invaluable and so important to us. And I love getting that information from you all, so keep it coming. I appreciate you. Make sure you subscribe so you can be involved in all of those future discussions for future cases that we do. Now, many of you came along as we've been following this Ronnie O'Neal trial. The trial finished, the sentence was handed down, the recommendation, I should say, was handed down by the jury, but now we are going to hear what the judge actually sentences Ronnie O'Neal to. I've taken a couple clips that we've seen from a couple different news stations and put them together to bring some of the highlights to you. We're not going to watch an hour video and react to it. The first thing we're going to get to is what Ronnie O'Neal says when he's got the opportunity to apologize to the victim's family.
I am not sorry for something I didn't do, and I am not sorry for the things I did do.
Mr. O'Neal, listen, stop.
All right.
Listen to me. You're not going to raise your voice again.
I'm not going to raise my voice again. I'm not.
I will have you removed from this courtroom. I can sentence you without you being present.
Yes, ma'am.
You don't conduct
I
yourself.
understand, Your Honor.
Thank you.
So the first thing he says is, I'm not going to apologize for something I did do. And I think he was going to say, I'm not going to apologize for something I did not do. But then he starts screaming, and we all remember this. So it started it all, his opening statement where he screamed at the jury just like this same exact tone. But at this point, no jury, no protections as a presumed innocent, just accused criminal defendant. Now he's been convicted. Judge cuts that off quick. Stop. You are not going to scream today, she says. I will send you out of the courtroom and I can sentence you without you being present. And he says, okay, Your Honor, I won't scream. So that's how this thing starts. Fireworks already.
But I will say, I'm sorry for your loss.
But then he does say, I am sorry for your loss. That's as much as we're going to play from what Ronnie says at this hearing. But I think you can see and sense already that he's not happy and he doesn't think this is over. He's still not admitting it. He's still not, having that come to Jesus moment where he's saying, I'm sorry, please forgive me, anything like that. And he's mic'd up throughout the rest of this hearing. And we're going to hear more comments from Ronnie O'Neal, even though it's not a statement like that. That statement he just gave was something that's not going to come back to bite him if he has a second trial, which he is going to want. But now it's the judge's turn. She gets to tell us what she thought and what she believes after watching and listening to this trial and seeing evidence that didn't necessarily come in at trial. So let's hear what she has to say.
There's a part of you that can be very charming and very likable. And with all due deference to your counsel, they're all excellent lawyers. Excellent lawyers. But I have to tell you, I think that your representation of yourself also aided in saving you from the death penalty. I really do. I really think that.
Oh, please.
I could be wrong, but that's just my best guess.
So she says kind of something we thought throughout the entire trial, and it's really funny to go back and think about the discussions we had as a community here. Some of my thoughts, some of your thoughts. We all kind of thought the judge thought he was doing a good job. She gave him compliments throughout. She gave him compliments after it was over, saying you could have been a good lawyer in another life. And she now, the ultimate compliment, says she thinks the fact that he represented himself kept him from getting the death penalty. So it's important to point out that I've actually seen this judge impose the death penalty in other cases in her courtroom. And that's important when you hear how she compares this case to every other case she's ever seen in her career. So keep that in mind, that she has imposed death in the past. So if the jury would have recommended the death penalty in this case, what do you think she would have done? Comment in the comments below. If they would have recommended death, what do you think she would have done once you hear how she compares this case to any other case she's seen, knowing she has imposed the death penalty in the past? But she does compliment him here and says his work as his own attorney has kept him from that death penalty recommendation and probably her imposing that death penalty. Let's hear what else she has to say about his case.
However, well, you're welcome, Mr. O'Neal. I'm just telling you the truth as I see it. However, 19 years I've been at this job. I've seen human beings killed at the hands of others in every way imaginable. You name it, I've seen it. Shootings, stabbings, drownings, suffocatings, blown apart by cars in DUI manslaughter cases. Horrible things. This is the worst case I have ever seen as far as the facts go.
She explains all the horror she's seen in her entire career, and then she says, this, your case, is the worst I have ever seen as far as the facts go. So think about that. She's imposed death before, and this is worse than that case. This is worse than any other case where she has imposed the death penalty.
When the person from fire department, when he testified, and when he said that he retrieved the body of Ronnie O'Neal from the home, and all he could do was sob. It took every ounce I had not to start sobbing too.
She mentions the witness, one of the key witnesses, the firefighter or paramedic that carried his daughter's body, her lifeless body, out of the house. And then they said, what'd you do next? And he said, I just sobbed uncontrollably. We pointed that out and talked a lot about that in one of the other reaction videos. And I mentioned that that was incredibly powerful. And there's no way the jury didn't feel that as he was testifying. And the judge now admits it took everything in her not to start sobbing as she listened to that testimony. We're getting a real look into how this judge felt listening to this trial.
Because there is no way any person with any feeling could have witnessed or seen the photos of what occurred that night and not be haunted for the rest of your life. I know I will be. For the rest of my life, I'll be haunted by what I saw as far as the evidence and just the abject cruelty of it all. The abject cruelty. And I was aware, because I reviewed a lot of the discovery ahead of time, as you well know, did a lot of in-camera inspection of a lot of documents. And I was aware there was some evidence, at least, that when you needed to recover from your gunshot wound, that neither your parents nor your Aisha, Miss Robinson, would let you come recover at their home. I don't know if it's true or not. I'm not going to get into a dispute. I'm just mentioning there was some evidence referencing that in the records.
So this is kind of weird. She references discovery that may or may not have come out in trial, I'm not sure, that while he was recovering from his gunshot wound, his parents and his girlfriend at the time wouldn't let him recover at their house. Does that mean they were scared that he was going to murder them too or do something? Is she implying something there? Ronnie shakes his head and said, no, that's not true. She said, I'm not going to get into a dispute with you. It's just weird that she brought it up to me. And that's going to be a common theme throughout. And a question I'm going to ask for you is, do you think it was appropriate for her to go in so hard on Ronnie O'Neal in this sentencing hearing? What do you think about that as just a layperson not knowing? I realize a lot of you have strong feelings and thoughts about Ronnie O'Neal and about this case, and that's fine. She's an unbiased judge doing her job here. And she really gets personal and goes in hard, talks about trying not to sob, talking about how she brings in stuff that she saw during discovery and in-camera review, and talks about how that's affecting her now. So it's not necessarily a problem if other things come into play in her sentencing than just what happened at the trial. The lawyers are allowed to submit sentencing memorandums, testimony on both sides, witness statements, good for Ronnie O'Neal, bad for Ronnie O'Neal. We've talked about that a lot when talking about sentencing. So it's not necessarily improper. That's something outside of the trial, but that was in discovery or was evidence in the case, came into play in the judge's sentencing, and she's talking about that. But do you have a problem with kind of her tone and how she's doing it throughout this problem? And it's going to continue. We've got more of this left. So let's think about that as we're listening to what this judge says to Ronnie and about his case.
And all I could think about, because I knew that Miss Barron was not with you romantically at the time. And I knew that she just out of the goodness of her heart let you come stay with her. And it is beyond tragic that that critical decision ended in so much horror for her and for her children. It is unspeakably cruel what happened as a result of that one decision.
So then she says, I know that Keke, the victim in the case, and you were not romantically involved at the time, but she let you stay at her house out of the goodness of her heart. And now she's going to get into what she thinks of Keke as a mom based on the pictures and what was seen at that house. This tells me, because we've talked a lot again, we've gotten each other's insight on what do you think, what do you feel when you hear these witness statements? Well, we heard a lot about Ronnie O'Neal saying Keke's a bad person, she has this criminal history, she was trying to kill him and I killed her in self-defense. Well, we're hearing right now what this judge felt about that and whether or not she was buying any of that talk about Keke having any wrongdoing in this case. We're getting insight into that right now, and the judge is putting that to bed. She didn't buy a bit of it. Let's hear more of what she's saying. And this is really important because while we want to know each other's opinions, we want to know what potential jurors think in this case, we also like to know what is the judge thinking as she sits up there and listens to all this evidence, because she knows so much more than we do or even the jurors do. She knows what's been going on for years in this case. She's already referenced documents that none of us have probably seen, but she has reviewed as part of her job in this case. So let's listen to more of how she felt about Keke, the victim in this case.
The way that Miss Barron died.
Just for reference again, Keke is Kenyatta Barron's nickname that she was referenced that throughout the trial.
Was horrific, and that 911 call, which captured truly all of it. You heard, and everyone who's heard that 911 call heard a death scream. If anybody ever wants to know what it sounds like before a human being dies, knowing that their death is imminent, that's exactly what it is. That was a death scream. But
so then she makes another weird statement. If anybody wants to know what a death scream sounds like, listen to that 911 tape. But then we hear from Ronnie, we're going to see if it's true. We can hear him say that. An appeal is coming. We can all guarantee that. An appeal is coming. Now, the issue is he talked a lot about this already. He talked a lot about the issues with the 911 tape. He had the opportunity to get an expert and didn't. He made these arguments, but now it sounds like that's what he's going to stick to in his appeal. So let's keep listening now.
what happened to little Ronivia and to little Ronnie, but I'm going to focus on Ronivia because she was special. And you could tell Miss Barron had done everything she could to create a beautiful home for her family. Mm-hmm. I noticed that the Ronivia's bedroom, before you set it on fire.
Let's just stop right there as she quotes, "before you set it on fire." Indications are not good. She is not going to go light on Ronnie O'Neal. I mean, I think we've all already picked up on that, but she is letting him have it. She's leaving no doubt that she believes the jury brought the right decision down and the correct verdict that all the evidence pointed to. And she is now focusing on Ronivia, Ronnie's daughter. Just like the jury had to. They all probably felt the same way, just as you and I did when we talked about this, how horrible and horrific it was for this special needs daughter to have her own dad do this to her and do this to her mom in front of her eyes and do this to her brother. And that is now what the judge is going to explain. We all remember, we talked about it. We felt the same way as this judge and obviously this jury did.
You could tell she tried so hard to make her feel like a princess. Kenyatta did everything she could. And I noticed too in the kitchen, on the refrigerator, she put up magnets that said faith, love, family, hope. And then you know what else happened at the refrigerator during that night? It got splattered with blood all over it due to what happened.
And again, she describes all the nice things that Keke did for her daughter, making her feel like a princess, the magnets of faith, hope, and love on the fridge, and then says, but then it was splattered with blood. because of what happened. She's giving us insight into exactly how she feels about Ronnie O'Neal and about this case. And you can hear in the judge's voice how she's getting choked up as she's talking about what happened to Ronivia. Which this is all important because we couldn't be in the jury room. We couldn't hear the jury deliberate when they came down with guilty across the board. But I'm sure they were thinking and saying some of the same things. They were there the whole time, just like this judge.
Little Ronivia, she couldn't scream. She couldn't run away. And she witnessed what you did to her mother as far as shooting her mother in the arm with the gunshot. She knew. And the horror that child suffered. And she already had a life where she was born with challenges regarding her physical and her mental disabilities. But the pain and suffering that she suffered that night at your hands, unspeakable, absolutely unspeakable. And at the moment, that first time you struck her with that hatchet, and little Ronnie testified that all he could see was tears coming out of his sister's face. At that moment, that child knew. She knew she was being betrayed in the cruelest, most tragic and sorrowful way that a child could ever be betrayed. She was being betrayed by her parent, the one person that should be there to protect their children and love them and keep them from harm. And that was the last thing that child felt before she passed on from this earth, was your utter, cruel betrayal to her.
All right, so in the past parts of the video, she said what happened that night, what happened to her, the things that happened at the house. Now she's saying this happened at your hands, your betrayal of your daughter. You're supposed to be her protector as her parent, and you did this to her. Her last thoughts on this earth were my dad that's supposed to protect me is betraying that and murdering me. I mean, she's going in as hard as you can, basically, on Ronnie O'Neal in her position as judge in his case. And if you listen closely, why all this is important too is to listen to the words the judge is using. She made statements like she couldn't cry for help, she couldn't run away, which were, I believe, verbatim what the prosecutors said in their closing arguments and in the sentencing phase. The judge held on to those quotes. That's why it's important as lawyers, we try to determine and figure out the best way to state things that will be impactful in the jury and the judge will remember the facts that are important to the case and that prove it. Beyond all the smoke that might be blown sometimes by the other side and the other lawyers, we've got to determine the best way to cut through all that and to say it. And it seems like these prosecutors did a good job because the judge held on to the exact way that they described what happened to Ronivia.
So, Mr. McNair, I appreciate your comments about...
So it's interesting to they pan over to Ronnie's face and it's pretty, I don't know, smug. He's not crying. He doesn't look sad. He's not necessarily laughing, but it's kind of a smirk. I don't know. He's got not a lot of emotion, but if you were going to pick an emotion, it's not one that's serious. It seems more like a smirk than anything else, which when she's telling you, you did this to your daughter, you did this to your family, now I'm going to hammer you for it, basically. He doesn't seem to care. So now, before we get to what the actual sentence is that the judge hands down, let me know in the comments if you had any problems with how the judge gave her personal opinions and her personal feelings and her emotion, raw emotion about how this made her feel, about how Ronnie made her feel, about how his actions made her feel. Despicable, betrayal, the worst kind, doing this to your special daughter who was a princess. And Keke, who out of the goodness of her heart, let you stay with her, and that one tragic decision ruined everything in her life and her kids' lives. How does that make you feel? Because judges are supposed to look at the facts, look at the law, apply it, and come down what they think is a fair and just sentence. She could have simply said, the jury came down and decided that you were guilty based on the facts. Based on these facts, which are horrible facts, that you've been found guilty of by a jury of your peers of, I'm going to apply that, and this is the sentence I feel is just and fair under the law and given the sentence. She could have just simply done that. That would have protected against any appeal, against any potential bias this judge may have had. Because now after this, I have a feeling there's going to be something said in his appeal that this judge was biased against him, hated him, thought he was despicable, Based on the facts in this case, these are the worst facts she's ever seen. She couldn't put that emotion aside, and she was unfair. I can see him making an argument like that. And I think this sentencing hearing gives credence to that, even though I don't agree with it. And she's given him a lot of compliments, and maybe she's doing that to offset this tone she's using now. And I think it's understandable, and whether or not she would have said it, we all could have guessed she felt this way about Ronnie O'Neal. But now that she's put it on the record, in open court for everyone to hear, including Ronnie O'Neal, I would be surprised if he didn't use these statements put on the record by the judge to say that she was biased against him now in the appellate process. We'll see, so stay tuned for that. But I think this is going to open the door for at least some appellate questions. I'm not saying he's going to win because of it. Let me know what you think. Do you think she was biased against him? Do you think this is going to open the door to appeals? Or do you just agree with her and you agree with the fact that she's being a normal human being, not a robot, and she's talking about her emotions and her feelings on the case, even though she's supposed to be the unbiased professional judge in this situation? Let me know. All right, so let's listen in now. What sentence is she going to lay down on Ronnie O'Neal for all the charges he was convicted of? Just to remind you, maximum is life for some of them and 30 years for others.
I appreciate your comments about your own sentiments with the legal system, and I would never tell you it's perfect. It's not. But I'm going to look you in the eye and tell you, this is the worst case ever in my life, and I have seen some horrors, but this is it, and I'm going to mete out the punishment that I think this case deserves. All right, so with that.
She really could have just said that. I mean, that 15 seconds pretty much sums it up. This is the worst case, she reiterates. The worst case, and I've seen some horrible stuff. This is the worst case ever. Here's the sentence I think it deserves. That could have been the entirety of the sentencing hearing, and he wouldn't have had much to appeal based on that. Let's hear what she says.
On count one, Mr. O'Neal, I will adjudicate you guilty, sentence you to life in prison with a minimum mandatory of life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Count one, max, life.
Count two, I will adjudicate you guilty, and adjudicate you guilty on count one as well. Count two, adjudicate you guilty, sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole, consecutive to count one.
All right, so that's important. Let's pause here again. Life for count two. You're going to catch on the theme here as we go. But consecutive is an important word versus concurrent. Consecutive means they pile on top of each other. So he now not just has one life sentence, but two life sentences. If it was concurrent, they would run at the same time. So as he was running his first life sentence, he would also be doing his second life sentence and third life sentence. It would only be one life sentence. Now, with life, this doesn't really make a difference. But if you had a 10-year sentence and then a 5-year sentence and then a 3-year sentence, you'd want those to run concurrently, because as you were serving the 10 years, you would encompass the 5 years and the 3 years run concurrently, you'd be done. But consecutively, you're doing 10 years plus 5 years piled on top of that, plus 3 years on top of that. So you're really serving 18 years instead of 10. Right? So consecutively versus concurrently is a big difference. They are piled on top. With life, it doesn't really make that big of a difference because he's got life, minimum mandatory of life, no opportunity ever for parole. So all these life sentences he's getting stacked on top of each other is just as harsh of a penalty as she can give. It doesn't really make a difference on what he's going to serve, because obviously you can never serve more than one life sentence.
On count three, I'm going to sentence you on the attempted murder, adjudicate you guilty, sentence you to life in prison, running consecutive to counts 2 and consecutive to count 1. On count 4, on the arson, first-degree dwelling, I will adjudicate you guilty, sentence you to 30 years Florida State Prison to run consecutive to counts 1, 2, and 3. On count 5, aggravated child abuse, I'm going to adjudicate you guilty, sentence you to 30 years in the Florida State Prison to run consecutive to counts 1 through 4. On count 6, I'm going to adjudicate you guilty to aggravated child abuse, sentence you to 30 years in prison to run consecutive to counts 1 through 5. And on count 7, resisting arrest without violence, I will adjudicate you guilty, sentence you to time served. Credit for time served is 1,224 days.
So she sentences him to 3 life sentences and multiple sentences of 30 years in prison, all to run consecutively, just to pile on to say, you're getting the max, I'm throwing the book at you. You're lucky the jury did not recommend death because, as I said, she has imposed the death penalty in the past, and if this is the worst case she's ever seen, I'd be willing to bet she would have imposed the death penalty had the jury have recommended it, but they didn't. So she imposed all these life sentences and 30 plus years consecutively. And then the last one, resisting arrest without violence, time served. He's already been incarcerated for more than 1,200 days. You see him go and roll his eyes to that time served. Sentence to pile on there at the top, but she has thrown the book at him, given him the max, shown no mercy on him. And then the last 5 seconds of this clip are important. Let's hear what she says.
You have 30 days to appeal the judgment and sentence of the court. Thank you. We're concluded.
Then she finishes up with, as they finish every sentencing hearing, you have 30 days to appeal the judgment and sentence. So let me know in the comments if you think he's going to appeal. Just this judgment and sentence has to be done within the next 30 days, so we should be hearing about it. Let me know if you want me to do a video on it when it comes out. But for now, that's all we have on Ronnie O'Neal. Until next time. Thanks for watching this episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you like this content, please share it with your friends. Make sure you subscribe to our page and like our videos. If you want some interaction, get in the comments and we'll be sure to get back to you. If you want to know any more information about our firm or this page, you can find out in the description or visit tragoslaw.com. We post multiple times throughout the week, so make sure you hit that bell so you can get the notification and not miss out on the next episode.